tonight we're going to talk about and dive into the subject of stewardship. And I know a lot of people hear stewardship, and so they kind of cower away a little bit just because it can be, a lot of times, it feels like it's going to be a sermon about budgeting, or it's going to be a sermon. That's not what we're talking about tonight. In fact, I'm talking a little more on ownership than we are stewardship. And you can thank my 8th grade daughter for the title of tonight's sermon. You think you own it? That's cute. Because once you understand who the real owner is, it's a lot easier to be a good steward of what you own.
Well, that's good.
So we're going to jump right in. Point number 1, it all belongs to God. The first thing we have to understand is that it all belongs to God, not just the tithe.
Man, that's good.
Everything. Psalms 24:1 says, "The earth is the Lord's." Please notice these words. He owns it. And in case you had any doubt, and everything in it, the world and all its people belong to him. Well, that's just one scripture. All right, Psalms 50, verse 10. "For every beast of the forest is mine. I own them. And the cattle on 1,000 hills. I own the cattle and the hills. I know all the birds of the mountain and the wild beasts of the field are mine." They're mine. They belong to me. They're my property. And then I love this next statement. He says, "If I were hungry, I wouldn't even tell you, because the world is mine and all its fullness." If I'm hungry, I'm not even going to tell you, because you don't own the stuff to feed me. I do. I don't need your permission, right? This is a revelation that you have to get. You have to get a revelation that you can work for it, you can earn it, your name can be on the deed, but if you're a believer, then you really understand that it's God's.
Yeah, that's good.
When you understand it's all God's, you understand that what you do have, you have because God gave it to you. If God can trust you with a little, he can trust you with more. That's what being stewards is. That's why when God tells you to give something, you learn to just give it. It doesn't belong to you in the first place. You're just a steward of it in the meantime. Here a few months ago, we finally paid off our last vehicle, had no more car payments. We're like, this is going to be nice. We can kind of cruise without having a car payment for a while. And immediately God says, I want you to give away your newest car as a seed for your next vehicle. Well, I've been around long enough to know not to argue with that. And so I have a friend that we worked together at Lone Star. He was the children's pastor while I was a youth pastor, and he started a ministry while he was there that has just exploded. And now he's left the ministry and focuses on it full time. They've been featured on talk shows, Good Morning America, all this different stuff. And what he does is they take vehicles and they fix them up, and then they give them to single mothers, or they give them to spouses of fallen soldiers and fallen police officers and fallen firefighters and people who need them, and they give these cars to them. And so we called them up and we said, we're gonna give you this car. And they said, awesome, we'll come pick it up. And then COVID hit like a day later, and so they couldn't pick it up. So we're sitting here, we're trying to give this car away, and we're driving the one vehicle because that car doesn't belong to us anymore. And one day I had to come up here to the church, and my wife needed to go somewhere else. I said, that's fine, just drive that car. They haven't come pick it up yet. So she goes get in the car, and wouldn't turn on. So she's like, oh, something must be up. Maybe it's a battery. So she goes to turn it off and take the key out, and the key was stuck. It wouldn't come out. And right then God said, I told you to give that away, not to drive it. Okay. Right? And so God's like, it doesn't belong to you anymore. They may not have picked it up, but it's not yours anymore. So now we got a car sitting in the driveway with a key stuck in it that won't start. Because God's like, I ain't giving you that key back. Right? So then COVID's coming around, and I'm sitting there thinking, we can't seem to get them to come out and get the car. Like every time they can come get it, we're not home. Every time we're available for them, they don't have the truck available to come get it, or even just to drive it back. And so it's been sitting there, and I started complaining to God one day, and I said, God, I'm having to park the van over. Our ground's really soft, so we built a gravel parking lot kind of off to the side of our driveways because we have a lot of people come and stay at our house, and so it gives them a place to park. And I've been parking the van over there. And I'm like, God, I would really like to pull into the driveway. I mean, I've got this beautiful driveway and this nice garage, and that car's blocking the garage, and I can't get into it. I would really like to be able to move this car. Can you just let me start it long enough for me to get it into the driveway? And I heard God say, I gave you that house with that nice asphalt driveway. And I gave you the means to build that parking lot. But I mean, if you don't want to get your hair wet, and you want to park closer, I mean, I can take that off the table next time. You're okay, God. I will leave the car there. I will not pick it up. But then I don't give up on stuff. God, just give me a timeline. Like, I just want to know. And this is what God said to me. He said, who I have that car reserved for doesn't need it yet. When they need it, then they'll come pick that car up. So we've got a car sitting in our driveway right now, waiting for... But you also learn that when God asks you to give something away, you don't grieve over it. Regardless of what the person you gave it to does with it. And when God puts that in your heart, everything I have is God's. What he wants you to use that to bless someone else, you don't grieve over it or get upset because it's not yours in the first place. And it took God a while to get this through my head. So I'm going to tell 3 stories, and I know that's a lot of stories back in, but you'll understand why, because I was so thick-headed that it took me a while to get this. And so I was about 19 years old as my junior year in college. I graduated high school a year early, so I was always a year ahead in college. And it was over the Christmas break. And over Christmas break and New Year's break, they have a lot of rodeos, a lot of bull ridings. And I had one of, up to that date, the best couple of weeks I'd ever had. Won more money than I'd ever imagined I could win. And so I'm driving back, and I'm coming through Colorado, and I'm driving, and I hear God say, you know, there's that guitar you've been looking at. Why don't you go buy that guitar? I'm like, man, that is a nice guitar. And it's this Taylor guitar that I would go to the Haggerty's music store during the day, and I'd go play this guitar because it was a pipe dream guitar. They wanted $8,500 for this guitar, which back then, right now is still a lot of money for guitar. Back then was a whole lot of money for guitar. And like, you play this thing, and I swear, like, people raised from the dead just from the sound of it. Like, it was just beautiful sounding guitar. And God said, well, you won enough money this weekend to cover more than enough for that guitar. Bless yourself. Go buy that guitar. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do it. So I pulled in. I didn't even go to my dorms. I went straight to the guitar shop, bought this $8,500 guitar, went back. I stayed up all night playing that guitar, made my fingers bloody, slept in the next morning, went down at lunchtime to go to lunch down in the cafeteria, and there was a kid sitting in the lobby playing this beat-up old classical guitar, trying to learn to play the guitar, had the sheets laid out in front of him. And he was, 3 of the strings were even missing. And I heard God say, I want you to give him a guitar. And I thought, perfect. This is great. I've got lots. I just got a new guitar. I got the perfect guitar for him. I'll give him the one I learned on. I had a Takamine that I learned on. It's more than enough guitar for him. And God said, I didn't say I want you to give a guitar. I said, I want you to give that guitar. But God, I've only had this guitar for like not even 24 hours. And that was a lot of money. God said, did I ask? Okay. So I give the guitar. And I may or may not have held on to the handle and tug of war with them for a little bit and let it go. About 2.5 weeks later, I'm driving around somewhere in Rapid City, and I hear God say, hey, pull in that pawn store. And I'm like, oh, God's going to bless me with something, right? So I pull in this pawn store, and I look up, and there's a guitar. Looks exactly like the one that I just gave that guy. And they wanted $3,500 for it. So I went to the pawn store owner. I said, do you understand what guitar you have there? Like, I had just bought one for $8,500 not that long ago, and you're only wanting $3,500. He said, you'll never believe this. He said, 2 weeks ago, this kid came in and pawned that thing off for $500 loan and never come back. I said, 2 weeks ago? I said, was his name happen to be? And he said it. That was his name. And I jumped in my car, and I was ready to go beat somebody up. Right? And as I'm driving, I heard God say, why are you mad? It wasn't yours anymore. I mean, I kind of held it against that kid for a while. So you think that I would learn this, and then about a year later, and I will remember this, I had a fifth wheel camper that I'd take when I was rodeoing sometimes, and if I was going to be gone for a while, I'd have this fifth wheel camper, and I'd park it somewhere, and then that way I wouldn't have to keep driving all the way to South Dakota to rodeo. I could rodeo out of that camper, and I had a really gruesome injury to my shoulder, and so I was out for about 11 months with surgeries and rehab. And so a friend of mine had hit some rough times, and he'd been kicked out of his house and stuff. And so I was like, I don't need this camper right now. Why don't you just live in that camper. We'll go park it somewhere and live in that fifth wheel. It's a super nice fifth wheel camper, and I'll come get it whenever I need it again. And then I forgot all about it. I was still making like insurance payments and things on it, and he's living in it. And then I come back from my surgery, and my very first PBR back had my career-ending injury, and so then I'm not even thinking about the camper at all. I forgot I even had it. And Ivy and I get married, and we get this offer for this job at Lone Star. And so we're moving to Montgomery, and we wanted to buy some time to buy a house. And so we're like, oh, we have that camper. Why don't we bring that camper down? We'll live in it for a few weeks. So I called my dad and said, hey, can you go grab that camper? And I'm sure it's been 2 years now he's been living in that thing. And my dad called me and said, you don't want that camper. It turned into his drinking house. He said the floors are ripped up, holes in the walls, the tires are flat. He said he trashed your camper. That I was still, not only was I making insurance payments, I believe I was even making like payments where he was parking it, right? And he trashed it, wasn't even living in it. And so I held that against him, and I didn't talk to him for a while. And so God apparently didn't get it through to me enough. And so like about a year later, I had my rodeo car. And those of you guys at rodeo, Brandon, back me up on this. You got a special relationship with that vehicle, right? That is your baby. You drive all over the country in this car. Mine was Foxy Rose. She was a Dodge Intrepid, bright, beautiful red. I mean, I traveled all over in that thing. And we had this young couple that they had a young daughter that was old enough to buy a car, and I knew they couldn't afford one. So God said, give them your car. So I give them the car. And you'd think by now I would know to not be worried about what would happen, but this is my baby. You got to understand the relationship. And a week later, the guy says, man, we really needed that money. Thanks for that money for selling the car. And I was like, you sold Foxy? He said, yeah, I sold her to, actually I didn't sell her. The government had this program. They're trying to cut down on gases in the air. So any old cars, you could bring them in and they would give you what the car was worth and then they'd crush it. You crushed my baby? And I was crushed. Right, I'm just glad that it didn't happen. I'd have cried. I might even shed a tear over it. And it was at that moment that I realized it was never about how much the guitar was worth. It was never that I needed the camper or not, and it was never how much that car meant to me sentimentally. It was always about how much I was willing to give when God gave it, and learning that once I gave it, it no longer belonged to me. And I had to learn that at a young age. And now when I give something, I don't care. Because, you can't get any worse than crushing your baby. I've never had a relationship with a car like that again. It's like when your good dog dies. You just I swear, I'm never going to have a relationship with a dog like that ever again. Listen, I'm only responsible for how I steward what God has given me to steward. I'm not responsible for how they steward what's given to them. And for me to judge them for how they're stewarding is pointing one finger with 4 pointing back. Yeah. It's not my job to judge. I gave it to them. And that's a hard thing to do because when you give somebody something, you usually have ideas, right? God laid on our heart one time to pay for somebody's bills. So Ivy and I paid for their bills for an entire month. And they were struggling, really, really, really struggling. And so we're like, this is going to help them. We told them, put that money aside, gives you some buffer, then you're not going to be struggling anymore. And they went out and used that money to put a down payment on a car 10 times nicer than anything we drove. And in 4 months, they were broke again because they couldn't afford the payments. And I was mad. And then God told me, give it to them again. But God, they're not good stewards. I didn't ask them. I'm asking you to steward. See, I can only control what I can control. And when God says give, you give. And you have to learn that. And when you realize you don't own it, it's a lot easier to give because it's this isn't mine to begin with, right? When it belongs to God, it belongs to God. Many of you in here probably have this revelation in full more than I do. Some of you have it part way. Some of you don't have it at all. But you have to get this. It changes everything. It's the greatest way in the world to live, to have wonderful things you can enjoy and not own any of it. This is something that has to get deep down in your heart. So number one, you need to know that God owns it all. Number two, the first belongs to God. Exodus 13:2 says, consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both man and beast. Now I want you to notice this. I want you to notice God saying this. And by the way, this is the same God who can't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And what does he say about the firstborn? It is mine. It belongs to me. Now we know it all belongs to God, but for some reason, he set aside the first for himself. Exodus 23:19 says, the first of the first fruits. That's for those of you that are hard of hearing. Not hard of hearing here, hard of hearing here. The first of the first fruits of your land you shall bring into the house of the Lord. You shall bring them into the house of the Lord. Do you know how I know that none of this belongs to you? Because if you owned it, you would give it.
Wow.
If you don't own it, you just bring it.
That's good. Wow.
God didn't say, give it to me. He said, bring it to me. Bring to me what is already mine. Right? Genesis 4, verse 3, and in the process of time. Now, those words are very, very important. In the process of time, it came to pass, so it happened over time, that Cain brought an offering. It doesn't say the first. It says an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. You notice he didn't bring the first fruits. And then Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock, of their end of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel in his offering, but he did not respect Cain in his offering. I want you to realize something, because so many people say, well, tithing it was under the law, and we're not under the law anymore. That's true. We're not under the law as believers. But if you think that means you can murder or commit adultery or steal and it not affect you, you're greatly deceived.
Man, that's good.
So we're going to put a timeline up here. So I want you to realize the timeline to see this. So first of all, Cain and Abel was around 4,000 BC. Just to give you some numbers. So Cain and Abel around 4,000 BC. Abraham was around 2,000 BC. So 2,000 years after Cain and Abel and 2,000 years before Christ was Abraham. Now Moses, the law come through Moses. That's simple, and I don't think anyone will disagree with that. I mean, that's all through the scripture. I mean, God gave him the law. 1,500 BC. And then David, just to give you some markers, about 1,000 BC. So that's just a little bit of Old Testament with some characters that you may know, and know the timeline of when this was all taking place. Because here's what I want you to notice. Cain and Abel, 4,000 BC, and Moses with the law, 1,500 BC. So quick math. How many years is that? 2,500. I wanted to hear. Oh, we had to get the teacher back there. I was hoping. I was really enjoying the look on people's faces trying to carry the 4 and bring the behind. I don't even know where they got the 4. 2,500 years before the law was given, God accepted a firstborn offering, but did not accept another offering because it wasn't the first fruits. This is a principle with God. By the way, 2,500 years before the law, and the law said thou shalt not murder, right? Was murder still wrong when Cain killed Abel? So murder didn't become wrong when the law was given, and tithing didn't become right when the law was given. And by the way, Abraham was 2,000 BC. That's 500 years before the law. And Abraham tithed in Genesis 14. So tell me why Abraham would tithe 500 years before it was even written, unless he knew that it was a principle that the first of all your harvest and income belongs to God. You say, well, I don't understand this word belongs, because it all belongs to God. Yes, but for some reason, he set aside the first for himself. In fact, God calls the person who does not return the tithe a thief. God does. Joshua 7, Malachi 3. You can look it up for yourself. Joshua 7 uses the word stolen. They've stolen it. Malachi 3, which we're going to look at here in a minute, says you've robbed me because it belongs to me. So it all belongs to God. The first belongs to God. It all belongs to God. Now we're going to get into the third, which is the tithe belongs to God. The tithe belongs to God. The word tithe is a Hebrew word, and we're going to click through this pretty quick today, just so you know. The word tithe is a Hebrew word which means the 10th. And when you see it in Scripture, it actually means the first tenth. See, that's important because we've just made it the 10th and we forget about it being the first. When your sheep had a lamb, you were to give the first one to God, not the 10th. In rodeo, there's this question among Christian rodeo athletes. When you tithe, do you tithe on what you won or do you tithe on what you won after your expenses? And I used to have the mentality of, well, it costs a lot. If you're going to make a run at the NFR or run, you're going to spend about $60,000 a year. So when you're winning $70,000 or even less, any tithe that's kind of hard to give up another $6,000, wouldn't you say? Or $7,000 or whatever it is that you're giving up. You're not leaving very much wiggle room. And so a lot of people will do it after expenses. And so I started doing the same thing because I'd even heard it taught by people that I respected. And then I was driving one day and God dealt with me and he said, is it the first if you're taking out bills first? And then God said to me, if you think I can bless you when you're taking it out afterwards, imagine how much I can bless you when you set aside the first. Here's the thing with tithing. I don't always see it right away. A lot of times I don't see it at all. A lot of times that God's supplying, you don't even see it. And there's been times I've sat down and tried to figure my bills out, and I'm pretty smart with math. And I'm doing the math some months, and I'm like, something ain't adding up. I didn't see it. I didn't trace it. I stopped trying to find it. Sometimes, because I'm like, it just ain't adding up. But when I need it, when you lose a house from a hurricane, and nobody's going to pay for it, and you still owe $100 and something thousand on it, and your family is living in a house that is overrun with black mold, and you have a brain injury that is accelerated by black mold, you can't tell me all our tithing didn't pay off. And I reminded God, hey, I'm a tither. And here was the revelation I had in that moment was, God, you said that you're going to pour so much money and so much into my storehouse I can't hold it, but yet my storehouses aren't full yet. And I've been a tither for a really long time. And it was like God said, okay. And we went through a phase there where our store, I don't think I've ever given more money away than that 2 or 3 year period. Because that's the thing, when the storehouse is overflowing, you know what that means, right? You have more than you need. Yeah. So you better be giving more. Yeah. We had a family that they both have passed away here recently, but my brother broke his neck. They let us stay in their house, and they had some kids that all went in the ministry, but they didn't, and they owned a bunch of businesses, and just everything that they touched was gold. And when my brother was in the hospital, they saw how hard it was on me, being there. I was only about 15 years old or so, and so he said, why don't you come work for me and landscape for me? So I'd be out there working around they had a legitimate mansion, and it was a big, huge log mansion, and I'd be working around it. And one day he called me into his office, and he said, I've never shown anyone this, but I want you to see this. And he had a checkbook that had the transparent thing on the back, so when you write the check and then you flip the page, kind of like businesses have. And I started flipping, and the entire book was one ministry after another, and the entire book was 1 month. And I started trying to add it up, and he probably gives away more in 1 month than I've made my entire life. We're talking easily 6 figures a month, if not pushing 7. And he said, I don't know why I'm showing you this, but he said, our call, what God has called us to do is to supply. And he said, the crazy thing is I can't give enough. Because the more I give, the principal comes back and the more I make. They bought a failing rice company because God told them to buy a failing rice company. And then Trader Joe's comes in and says, we want you to supply all our rice for Trader Joe's. They made more in a month than they spent on the entire business. He was driving down the road one day, this man was, and God told him, turn right. God was only giving him one step at a time, so he turned right. You have to have faith to hear what he did. Turn right. God said, now turn left. So he turns left. Now turn left again. So he turns left, and he's in a residential area. God keeps winding him back, and then he says, stop at this house. So he stops at that house. And he said, I want you to write a $1 million check and walk it up and hand it to those people. $1 million check. I can tell the story in full now because he's passed away. So he walks up, knocks on the door. God told me to give you this, and then walks away. That's faith. On the other side of that door was a pastor needing a new building. And if they didn't come up with $1 million by the end of that day, they were going to lose the building. Tim Stewart now pastors that church. And it was so cool hearing from both sides because I knew who gave the money, and he had no idea who the pastor was. And I knew the pastor that got the money, he had no idea who the stranger was that showed up. And I still never told him. I never connected those dots for him because I don't want him to know. Because it's kind of like the bull business. Someone goes and spends a bunch of money on bulls, everybody wants their phone number because they all got a bull to sell them. You know, you give $1 million to that church, my church over here can be, you know what I'm saying? But the giving thing, it's a real principle. Here's the reason why you're supposed to give the first lamb instead of the 10th lamb. It would not take faith to give the 10th one. 10th one's already, the other 9 are already born.
Man, that's good. Yeah.
So it's easy to give the 10th one. Well, I've got my 9. I'm here. You give the first one, you don't know if the other one's going to be born or not. It takes more faith.
Man, that's good.
When they went into Jericho and they went in the promised land, God said, bring. Once again, he didn't say give. He said, bring all the silver and gold from Jericho into the house of the Lord. Now, why did he say bring all of it and didn't say bring a 10th of it? Because Jericho was the first city. It's the principle of the first. And God is saying, you bring me the first and the rest is going to be blessed. Did they bring all of it? No, they didn't. They kept some back. What happened? They lost the next battle of Ai. And Ai was a very, very small town. They couldn't even beat a small town. God was like, oh, that's how we're going to play this. You ever do something and you're like, man, I'm really good at this. And then God takes his hand off you and you realize, I really stink at this. Right?
Yeah.
I've been there many times.
That's exactly right.
They had stolen. Now remember, those are God's words. They had stolen what belonged to God. Leviticus 23:30. And all the tithe of the land, whether the seed of the land or the fruit of the tree, is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord. Isn't that amazing that the tithe is holy to the Lord? He reveres it. And we get hung up a lot on 10%. Why did he say 10%? It's not so much, really. And it's not so much that it's the 10%, it's the first 10%. And we forget we like to overpass that because that's a hard thing to preach. It's hard enough to stand up on a pulpit and preach people to give money. Because your heart is not, people are like, oh, the preachers, they just want money. That's not why we're in this. And quite frankly, this church gives a lot of that away. A lot of it. Because that's the principle. If churches aren't tithing, there's a lot of churches out there can't figure out why they're failing. When they want the people to tithe and they're not willing to tithe themselves.
Yeah. That's good.
Right? Every church I've been a part of is giving churches, and every church I've been a part of has been successful. That's not coincidence. But it's hard enough to preach giving. That's why I'm preaching it, not David. I'm just be honest with you. Because it is. Because you'd be amazed at how much attacks pastors get when they preach about money. But you got to understand, this isn't just money. My dad's been teaching that for a long time. Did you know that the first pig to hit the ground on Fritz Arment's ranch is slaughtered and given to my dad? My dad doesn't ask for it, but he understands it's the first one. It says the first of everything, the land. My dad had a fire hit here a couple months ago, burned all of their winter hay, which up there, that's a big deal. Yeah. And even ranchers who aren't saved were bringing the first cut and dropping it off at my dad's. We got a freezer full of meat that my dad gave to me because people had brought meat to him because he's the pastor. And there's a lot of people in that area that to them is valuable. And so to them, that's even more than money. So we're bringing you the first deer we slaughter's coming to the church. And Dad's like, I ain't got enough for it. And he's like, the first deer we slaughter's coming to you. And that's some good steers. Yeah. I'm telling you, that's good meat. Like that's your high-end quality black Angus meat, and we've been eating good. We got buffalo and beef and all that different stuff, and we've been giving it away. That's the process that works.
Yeah.
I don't know why God chose 10% other than it's just easy and it's the same for every person.
Yeah.
It's equal. Do you realize that if you tithe, you're making the same level of sacrifice as a millionaire who tithes? You may not be given the same amount, but 10% to you is just as big a hit to them. The tithe on $50,000 a year is the same exact sacrifice as a $5 million a year salary tithe. It's 10%. And the amount of sacrifice it takes for you to give $5,000 on $50,000 is the same amount it takes them to give $500,000 on $5 million. So if we're robbing God, what are we robbing God of? This is the cool part, and this is the part I'm excited about. God doesn't need your money. You got to understand that. If God truly needed to finance something, this is the same God who made food fall from the sky and feed hundreds of thousands of people. God isn't trying to be greedy and saying, you need to give me what is mine. That's not what he's trying to say. God wants your obedience. But even more, he says we're robbing him. Now, I've read Malachi 3 and preached on Malachi 3 a lot. And I've been saying this whole series, there's times that you read something and you've read it a million times, and then all of a sudden God reveals something new to you. And God reveals something new to me on this, and I've never seen it this way, and I'm never going to see it the same way again. I truly believe that what God is saying here is we are robbing God of giving him the opportunity to bless us.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Now, I believe he's saying you're robbing me of the opportunity to bless you. I would like to bless you. I would like to open the windows of heaven on you. I would like to rebuke the devourer for you. But because you won't do it my way, you're robbing me of the opportunity to do that.
That's exactly right. That's good.
Let's read Malachi 3. Will a man rob God? Now, if we want to think about it, just hear me out on this. Will a man rob God of an opportunity to bless him? Yet you have robbed me of opportunities to bless you. But you say, in what way have we robbed you of opportunities to bless us? In tithes and offerings. In other words, the whole reason God came up with the concept of tithing was not to support the kingdom, because he could have sent ravens to do that. He could have brought water out of a rock. He could have made quail fly in and land right in our laps. So God did not invent tithing to support his work. He did not invent tithing for his benefit. He invented tithing for our benefit as an opportunity to bless us.
Man, that's good.
So since you haven't got these offerings, watch these next verse. So if you've robbed God of that opportunity to bless you, you are cursed with a curse. You're under a curse instead of a blessing. For you have robbed me, even this whole nation. Now bring all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and try me in this. In other versions it says, prove me in this, or test me in this, says the Lord of hosts. He's so confident in this principle, he is challenging you to test it and see how powerful it works.
That's really good.
That's confidence. That's Amy Barrett holding up a blank note of paper confidence. The most boss thing I've ever seen at a hearing. That's confidence. And that's the confidence that God has in your tithing. He's so confident in it, he says, test me. I think of like a bully on the playground, test me, come on, swing. You know what's going to happen. Right? Test me in this, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out such a blessing for you that there'll not be enough room to receive it, which means you have more to give. And I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes. Those 3 words is what helped convince me that this is what God was saying. Because he was saying, you've robbed me. He did not say he's hurting and he's running out of gold for his streets in heaven. He said, you robbed me of a blessing and I can prove it. I will rebuke the devourer, not for the kingdom's sake, for your sake.
That's good. That's really good.
That's a blessing. So that he will not destroy the fruit of the ground, nor shall the vine fail to bear fruit for you in the field, says the Lord of hosts. The vine represents your business. Whatever business you're in, it won't fail. It'll bear fruit. And if your business is farming, it's even more literal. We have some friends in Wyoming who we had quite a few years ago. We had a grasshopper infestation, and it was bad. And they're tearing everything down. So these friends of ours, they owned a pretty good spot of land, and they had a big hay field. And these grasshoppers were coming through and just eating everything. So they got in their truck and they drove around. It was too much land to walk around, so they drove around. And they drove around saying, God, we're reminding you that we are tithers. Remember what we talked about a few weeks ago about sending it back to God and completing the circuit? They were completing the circuit. God, this is what your Bible says. And yet the devourer is literally coming to take our fields. And we're reminding you of what you promised us. And we've tested you on this our entire life. And then they let it go and didn't worry about it. And left that field and didn't come back for a couple weeks. When they came back, their fence all the way around the property had grasshoppers on all of the barbed wires all the way around. And the neighbor's property was chewed all the way down to the dirt. And there wasn't a blade of grass down on their property. A barrier. When you guys had that trailer burn up, and they had all their life's work in that trailer and their cows, and a tire blows up and the whole thing catches on fire, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is what I call them. I know they're females, but I still call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are standing there, and flames are licking up all around them. Flames are licking over top of the trailer. And they opened that gate, and there wasn't a single hair singed on a single one of those cows. And it was something that David's mom said, we prayed over your stuff. You didn't own that trailer. Satan attacked the only thing he could attack. God blessing you for giving is such a strong principle to him that even non-Christians reap from this principle. You ever think about that? That's how powerful this principle is. Just look through the world. There's people who don't follow God at all, and they give a lot, and they keep getting more back. That's how strong this principle is. If God can bless non-believers who aren't even giving it to God, how much more do you think he blesses those who are giving to God what already belongs to him in the first place? We were building a new youth facility at our old youth group. And it was going to be a multi-million-dollar facility. And the pastor told us, we're going to build the shell and everything in it, and you have to supply everything inside of it. And that's a lot of money in itself. And so, I'm like, okay, God, we're gonna build a few things here, and we're gonna cut back. And I heard God say, I want the best of everything. In fact, he didn't just say that to me. I opened up my Bible to study, and I read where when they built the temple, they always put the best. I'm sitting there going, God, I'm doing the math, and I don't see it, but I believe you. And I got woken up in the middle of the night one night with a dream, and I had this dream of what the lights were going to look like in this youth building. So I called a friend who had done lights for Toby Mac, and it was very similar to that setting. So I said, can you come in and give us I want something like a Toby Mac concert, because we're going to run every single week. We ran youth like it was a conference. So I want these lights, and I want it to be this thing that kids want to show up. And he comes and he gives me a price, and it was going to be like $70,000. And I said, I'm not telling anybody about this. And so I'm like, God, if that's what you want, you're going to have to give us that money. And at that time, we had about $8,000 or $9,000 in the youth account. And I was going to speak at this event the whole event was for raising money for missionaries. And before I left, I heard God say, I want you to have the administrator write you a blank $7,500 check. Now, not only did it take faith to do that, it took faith to go to the administrator and say, you need to write me a $7,500 blank check from the youth account, and took faith for him to write it. And so I go to this conference, and there's a missionary talking before I'm going up on the stage, and he's talking about how they're going into these villages, and they're going to project these stories of Jesus to these kids while they're digging wells. And these kids have never heard the story of Jesus before. They're going in areas and never heard it. And he said, we need projectors, we need generators, we need all this stuff to run this. It's going to be about $7,500. I look down in my pocket, And he's walking off the stage, and I said, just put your name on that and give us a receipt. And I come back the very next day, and I had a guy go out to lunch with me. I really didn't know a lot about this guy. I'd been fishing with him, been doing stuff. I didn't know what he did for a living. I just kind of hung out with this guy, been pouring into him, and he'd been asking about hearing from God and what he was hearing from God. And so we go out to eat. He said, I really want to take you out to eat. This is the very next day. And he says, I feel like God was telling me that I need to give towards your lights. And he was thinking these lights like this, and I was thinking these lights like this. And he handed me a check, and I put it in my pocket, didn't think nothing of it. It's rude to open and look at it in front of him. And I go back to the office and forgot the check was even in there, and I'm going around doing stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I got a check, and I pulled it out, and it was a $30,000 check. So I tithed on that, because we tithed on that. And so I took $3,000, and we split it up. We had a bunch of missionaries that we supported out of our youth group, and I split that money up amongst those missionaries. So we're just going to bless all of them. Go get something you need. And I mean, I hadn't so much as filled out the paperwork to divvy that $3,000 out, and I come back and I get a phone call from my buddy who's doing the lights, and he said, you're never going to believe what just happened. He said, where I buy my lights from is going out of business. And he said, I'm going to be able to buy everything you need. And not only that, I'm going to be able to upgrade it to the best that they have. Full installation, everything is going to cost about $27,000. Right? So then, we need a new sound system. And God gave me this vision. What do teenagers like? They like a lot of bass. Just Joe standing next to their car sometime. So I had this vision of just blaring bass through this thing. So I brought a guy in. I said, what's it going to cost to do this? And he said, it's going to be about $25,000. Okay. I know God's going to supply it. I ain't going to worry about it. And we had raised quite a bit more money towards it again. And God said, I want you to give all that away. I want you to empty your youth account. Now you got to remember, we're building a building. And every dime counts. And God says, I want you to empty that, and I want you to give it away. Those missionaries you divvied out for, I want you to divvy all that out. We had about $12,000. That's half of what we needed. I didn't even question. I went to the administrator, said, I'm listening to God. He said, I'm not even questioning, I'm doing it too. He comes back to me an hour later and he says, there's an envelope. There's an envelope here, $50,000 cash, and one word on it, youth. So we were able to buy bigger and better than we wanted. And you guys were in there. I mean, that sound system was, we built the speakers into the frame of the building. And it was so much bass that the city had to put an ordinance on our building. The first time we ran it, the guy was happened to be checking stuff, and it's caused a crack to go all the way down the sheetrock. He's glad he saw it because he found weaknesses. But the first night we had a Christian rapper come in. The first night we did youth, and we packed that place out, and they're all jumping up and down. The fire marshal was there, and the floor was flexing, and he's like, "We got to get you all out of here. It's a little bit too dangerous." But the bass, we did full bass that night. And the sanctuary was about, 200 yards from the building. And the pastor's notes kept falling off of his pulpit. The neighbors in the backyard thought there was an earthquake because it was knocking pictures off the walls. China was falling out of the cabinets. We might have gone a little overboard on our bass. I told Ivy, I said, we need to rent this out for people with kidney stones. Just lay down in front of those speakers. People pay a lot of money to do that right there. I mean, it'll shake it out of you. My point is, God will supply. I wasn't done with our money. There's a lot of times I wanted to give, and God said, I didn't tell you to give. Robert Morris has a story of he was, this family come in one time, and they were as missionaries, and they were talking about how we need this X amount of money, and so he just wrote them a check. And he said he got in the car, and he said he heard God say, I'm so mad at you, I could spit. And he said it wasn't that good spit like that heals blindness. And he said, what do you mean? I gave the money. He said, you never asked me first. I had the whole thing planned out. You were going to give X amount of money. These people here were going to give what they could give. And these people here were going to give what they could give. And these people here were going to give what they could give. And I was going to bless all of them. But you had to go and ruin the whole thing. God knows. And one thing I've learned over the years, when God says give, give. We don't even question. Because I know he's going to supply on the backside of it. And I know it's not his to begin with. You see all these preachers all the time, and they got nice cars, and they've got places. There's a specific preacher that gets a lot of flack for what he has, when the reality is he gives more than he can. And his wife finally gave him a beat-up old junk car, because she's like, I got tired of him giving away the nice cars, and he's too embarrassed to give that car away. I could go on story about this stuff. But when you understand who really owns everything you own, it changes your entire perspective on giving. And when God can trust you with a little, he can trust you with even more. And every time I've not wanted to give, God reminds me why I have it in the first place. Amen? Father, I thank you that you love us enough that you've given us a principle so simple as this, that you turn around and bless. And that you put something in place like tithing, where you can bless everything that we need, every desire of our heart. Fill our storehouses so full that it's overflowing and we can just give more. Father, I thank you that if someone here today is struggling with this concept and they're thinking, oh, it's just another church asking for money. We're not asking for your money. I never said give to this church. I said give where God told you to give. If there's someone here that's struggling with that, Father, I pray that you soften their heart to realize this is not about what they're giving. It's about their giving. And Father, I thank you that you show them in a way that blesses them, that they know beyond a shadow of a doubt. You said, prove me in this. I'm going to say something real quick, and I didn't have this in my notes. My parents, when they first started being tithers, there was a difficult thing for them because they didn't have any money. A lot of people don't realize that we grew up extremely poor. The county that I grew up in, Forbes magazine names it one of the 5 poorest counties in America every year. A lot of times it's the #1 poorest county in America. And my dad pastors on that. And so but before they started pastoring, God told them to give, and they didn't have anything to give. And at that time, they didn't even have money for groceries. But they understood this is a principle. And so my dad and my mom, they put a bunch of canned food. Some people brought them some canned food. And they put that canned food in a cabinet. And for more than the next year, for over a year, they never had to buy groceries again. They'd open that counter, that cabinet, and it was full. And it was manna. You get tired of it. There was one time that we were needing money and needing food, and my grandparents, and as before they were really following God, had a hunter had shot a really old buffalo, and I believe God told them to give a good buffalo, but I'm not going to hold it against them because they were just learning how to give, and they gave that old buffalo. And for 2 years, I don't know if you've ever seen how much meat's on a buffalo. For 2 years, we ate that buffalo, and he tasted horrible. Soured me from buffalo for the longest time. But for 2 years, they never had to worry about meat. See what I'm saying? It may not have come the way they wanted it. Now my dad, through his bucking horses, is not an issue. Not an issue at all. Because God has blessed that over time. And you may be saying, well, it's a sacrifice for me. I can sit here and tell story after story. When people come to me and say, I'm struggling, my first question to them is, are you tithing? Because if you're not tithing, there's not a thing I can do to help you. Not a thing I can do to help you. Right, Angie? Stephen wanted a dream job. Boom. Right? I can look around this whole room and point out people who are struggling. Are you tithing? Well, we have been, but it's tough. I understand that. Are you giving God your first? How important is it to you? Just real quick, Father, I praise you and thank you that we can be a blessing to everybody we see and everywhere we go, Father, and everybody that we are in contact with this week, Father, that we can be a light to them, we can be a shining light to them, Father, and that we can show people God's love through ourselves, Father. I praise you and thank you that you light our path, light our way. In Jesus' name, amen.